I want to thank you all for coming for this, our first storytelling night for Maine Voices Against Violence. We certainly hope we can do it again. We would like to first introduce ourselves. My name is Kim Davis, and I am in the School of Social Work.
Hi, I'm Emily Bishop. I'm in the nursing program.
My name is Joanna. I'm from the College of Osteopathic Medicine.
And my name is Chloe, and I am from the College of Dental Medicine.
We want to thank UNE for hosting us in this really beautiful space, and for the Interprofessional Education Collaborative for sponsoring this event, and for Through These Doors and Maine Voice to Men for partnering with us on this journey. All the people from those organizations are marked. Can you all raise your hands? They've all got name tags on, and they'll be available for any questions that you might have when we're done. And finally, we want to especially thank our faculty advisors, Dr. Lori Power and Professor Amy Koa. We would like to begin the evening by saying that these are powerful stories, and therefore contain some strong language and some equally strong content. So if at any point this gets to be too much, please feel free to get up and take a break. We have domestic abuse advocates stationed in the entryway who are here to help if you should need it or want it. However, I will also say that this equally is a space in which it is okay to cry. You do not need to leave. Tears really make a lot of sense in response to these stories.
Stand a little taller. So you have on your chairs a couple pieces of paper and hopefully a pen. Somebody put a lot of time into getting those pens there for you. Additionally, you have our email. Should this night inspire you to share any of your stories, or if you know anybody that has a story that they would like to share. We are going to read 3 statements about domestic abuse to get the evening started. On your paper, you'll see 1, 2, 3, followed by strongly agree, disagree, and so on and so forth. We do not need your name because this is all anonymous, but we are going to do that now and at the end of the night just to see kind of perspectives of domestic violence from the community. You also have a blank index card as well, and those are for questions. So feel free to write questions down as the speakers are sharing their stories, because when they're done, we're going to collect those and then they will be answered by a panel. And that panel is made up of speakers from staff from Through These Doors, Maine Voice to Men, and the UNE Title IX office as well. Our helpful friends from Maine Voice to Men will walk through the audience to collect those, and anybody else that you see, you can hand those along. And then a few housekeeping items. There are bathrooms to the back in the entryway. There's one on the right side, and then through the door down the stairs, there are more bathrooms there as well. Be careful because the stairs are steep. And also, if you were looking for IPEC forms or would like CEUs, you can find that information on the back table where all the resources are. And we would also like to remind everybody to please silence their cell phones and no photos either. Okay, so let's start with the 3 statements about domestic violence, which we would like you to respond to on those papers in the beginning section. So 1, domestic violence is an impulse control or anger management problem. 2, domestic violence is bad, but it happens elsewhere. It doesn't happen in my community. 3, if it were really that bad, the victim would leave.
Thank you for responding to those statements. And now, we want to share a brief background of our night. 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men have experienced physical violence by an intimate partner in their lifetime. And when cases of emotional abuse alone are factored in, the numbers are much higher. People in the LGBTQ+ community are even more significantly impacted. Additionally, the majority of cases are never reported. In Maine, every 2 hours and 5 minutes, a domestic abuse assault is called into law enforcement. In 2018, 34,053 calls came into the helplines staffed by the Maine Coalition to End Domestic Violence Resource Center. And half of 50% of homicides in Maine are domestic violence related, as compared to 16% nationally.
Domestic violence is a massive social ill that has gone unaddressed for years because of the false narratives that are perpetuated, most of which say that domestic violence is an individual, private issue, not a social one, and that allows for the grim statistics of this reality to be fragmented and blamed on the specific people involved. Our stories tonight focus on intimate partner abuse that occurred during the teen and young adult years. Why, you might ask? Because the Department of Justice reports that women ages 16 to 24 experience the highest per capita rate of intimate partner violence. And yet 81% of parents believe teen dating violence is not an issue or admit that they don't know if it's an issue. We would suggest that society in general does not know that women in this age bracket are at most risk. And we say women because 83% of survivors identify as female, although any gender identity can be affected by domestic violence. We, as a society, don't talk about this abuse, and we don't create safe spaces for survivors to be heard.
Abuse creates psychological despair that can leave a person isolated in grief that they cannot make sense of themselves, let alone explain to others. And for those who do reach out, they can often be met with responses that are fueled by false beliefs about survivors, responses which reignite the trauma they have already experienced, hurling them back into a cave of silence and covering them in misappropriated shame and self-blame. So this night is a night to break that silence and destroy that shame, because it's not yours to carry. Brené Brown defines shame as an intensely painful feeling or experience of believing we are flawed and therefore unworthy of acceptance and belonging. Shame leaves us feeling trapped, powerless, isolated. And interestingly enough, the remedy to coming to terms with this is to share our story. Brown goes on to say that shame hates having words wrapped around it. If we speak shame, it begins to wither. This is a night of speaking the shame that is keeping survivors silent. This is a night when we, as a community, can tell all survivors, your story matters, that you are seen, that you are heard, and that you are deeply worthy of love and belonging. And with that, we welcome our speakers.
This is a poem by the poet Mary Oliver entitled "The Journey," and it speaks upon resiliency. One day you finally knew what you had to do and began, though the voices around you kept shouting their bad advice, though the whole house began to tremble and you felt the old tug at your ankles. "Mend my life," each voice cried. But you didn't stop. You knew what you had to do, though the wind pried with its stiff fingers at the very foundations, though the melancholy was terrible. It was already late enough and a wild night, and the road full of fallen branches and stones, but little by little, as you left their voice behind, the stars began to burn through sheets of clouds, and there was a new voice, which you slowly recognized to be your own, that kept you company as you strode deeper and deeper into the world, determined to do the only thing you could do, determined to save the only life you could save. Thank you.
Just wanted to make a quick note that I'm extremely humbled to be here tonight, so thank you for having me, and very thankful that I can offer my voice to somebody who can't be here tonight. And that person is Anna, who submitted this piece, and she is a graduate student. No one understood me better. But wait, let me back up. Chapter 1. You see, I was a different kind of kid. Summer to me meant hours of uninterrupted reading. My library card was the most prized possession. I spent afternoons sitting in the sun and disappearing into worlds of language and metaphor and meaning, thinking about what it all meant, what life meant, and who I was in the swirl of all of that. My teenage years were marked by what I learned, where I went to school, what I read, and more importantly, what I wrote. Those years were not sprinkled by parties and people, but by thoughts and theories. I craved deep conversation, and I felt lonely without it. And then I met him. He was 21. Chapter 2. The world paused. The loneliness faded because it seemed at once no one had ever understood me better. That place in me that moved only with a depth of conversation so rare was moved by his response to me. He dove into that space where I didn't know anyone would ever go with me, and he seemed to understand. So I believed no one understood me better. Finally, I felt known, I felt appreciated and loved, I felt safe, and I felt I was home. So I softened, exhaled, into that deep space. I trusted because he entered my world of thought and meaning and metaphor and said the things that reflected understanding. What I could not see, however, that was as I exhaled, he breathed in. Not to truly know me, but to gather information, power, and with it, control. With every piece of knowledge he had of me, he built an intricate cage that trapped my thoughts and feelings and slowly and methodically twisted them into something ugly, leaving me confused and whirling in agony. And he would say, no, you misunderstood. You're crazy to think I did that. I would never do that to you. How could I? I understand you better than anyone. And he did. He understood what I needed enough to withhold it. He understood me enough to know which words and which responses would cause the most pain, a crushing of my soul in that deep space I know no one else would, so no one else could see. And he understood when to pause that vice grip and reinforce the bomb that he was able to apply because he was still swimming in the deep pools of thought and meaning with me. Because he could make the pain stop, it seemed that no one knew me better. Chapter 3. Since no one understands me better, I must be crazy. My pursuit of language and meaning and depth and purpose stopped. Not suddenly, but slowly with each cruel world, each twist of meaning, each torque of the wheel slowly killing the place from which everything in me existed, and replacing it with a depth of emptiness and loneliness I had never known. So then I had no thoughts. I had very few feelings. I would look at myself in the mirror and think, who is she? I must be crazy, I thought. He must be right, because no one understood me better. Chapter 4. It turns out crazy has a shelf life. Because the depth and meaning and desire for purpose in me could not coexist with crazy. One of them had to go. I couldn't see it at the time, and I didn't even know what was happening. I thought I was becoming even crazier. But I wasn't. I was fighting back. I was fighting for sanity, to find gravity, to find myself. But you know what? He did understand me better. Because he saw it. He saw the turning. He saw the waking up, the unwinding. So he tossed me out before I could figure him out. I landed in a heap of tangled thoughts, twisted feelings, and deep, deep shame. But I landed. And when I did, broken and bleeding and desperate, I looked up. And when I finally spoke, what I found were friends and family all around me who listened to my tangled up, twisted words as I tried to reclaim meaning and purpose. It was a very long process and painful because, my friends, real healing is not devoid of pain. But you know what I found? He was not the one who understood me better, because I am the one who understands me better, and that is more than enough. Thanks.
Imagine this. 553 days ago, a house in the middle of the woods, usually full of music, suddenly goes quiet. The 16-year-old girl who was always singing suddenly lost her voice. 553 days ago, this girl lost her soul when a boy made her feel as if her own body wasn't hers to control. Without sugarcoating, 553 days ago, this 16-year-old girl was raped. 552 days ago, she saw him at school for the first time. 552 days ago, she lost her breath as she sank into the panic attack of a lifetime. 526 days ago, she told her school guidance counselor. She prayed that maybe if she was honest about what she had been through, they would help her. 526 days ago, her assault was swept under the carpet to avoid bad publicity. 526 days ago, the now 17-year-old girl had lost all faith in humanity. 428 days ago, she breaks after 4 months and finally tells her parents everything. 428 days ago, she watched as her dad's heart broke because he felt as though he couldn't protect his baby girl. She watched as her mother blamed herself for letting her be with the boy who stole her daughter's voice. She watched as her best friend, her sister, became determined to get her baby sister the help she needed. 418 days ago, she found herself in intensive outpatient therapy, which means she literally has 7 hours of therapy, 7 days a week, for 2 months. 418 days ago, she found herself sitting at a desk, writing every detail of that night down to try to get a piece of paper to help her feel safe. 418 days ago, she was granted a temporary protection order. 417 days ago, she heard a knock on the front door of the quiet house in the middle of the woods. She felt the fear surge through her veins as she hid under her mother's bed. 417 days ago, she met the Maine State Trooper who delivered her protection order. The trooper said he didn't normally read the victim's statements, but for some reason he read hers. She just wanted to make sure that she was okay. 416 days ago, she heard the all too familiar sound of a message on her phone. Snitches get stitches, you know? 395 days ago, she found herself in court fighting for her safety. 395 days ago, her assault was called a high school fumbling. 395 days ago, she lost a court case and was not granted a permanent protection order, all because they couldn't prove she cried. 178 days ago, her mother fought to pass LD 1171, an act to prevent sexual and domestic violence and to support survivors. 178 days ago, she found herself surrounded by some of the strongest women she had ever met, many of whom had lived her nightmare. 178 days ago, her mother testified on her behalf and shared her story. 178 days ago, LD 1171 passed. Now, 553 days after her assault, she is tackling her senior year of high school and applying to college. 553 days later, her house is once again full of music. 553 days later, she is truly and genuinely happy she found her voice. 553 days later, I am proud to say I survived. Good evening. My name is Emily, and I am currently 17 years old. Throughout this journey, I have been through a total of 3 high schools, 4 months of intensive outpatient therapy, and 4 therapists. In other words, the last year of my life has been rough, but I'm still here. It has been over a year since my assault. This coming April will mark 2. And occasionally, I still find myself picking my brain about that night or searching through his social media. For months, I wondered to myself, was it the beat-up Adidas sneakers, leggings, and the blue shirt that I was wearing that made him feel that what he did was okay? Was I acting in a way that made him feel that he could do that to me? In all honesty, it doesn't matter what you are wearing or how you are acting. Predators will be predators. It's in their nature. It took me several months to realize this. There was no profound awakening that made me realize that it was not my fault. It was months of healing. My healing began at Acadia Hospital and continued through my cat Frankie and my family. So do not let someone tell you to let it go and that you need to move on. Everyone heals at their own pace. There is no timeline. I have been asked countless times why I did not come forward sooner, why I waited 4 months to tell my parents what had happened. I explained that I had told my school guidance counselor and they didn't report my assault or do anything. I explained that I was in so much pain that I did not want to subject my family to that pain. Lastly, I explained that I wasn't ready. There is a considerably large amount of fear that comes with reporting or even speaking of your assault. You fear that no one will believe you, or if you're in school with him, you're terrified of seeing him every day. So it takes time to come forward, and that is okay. Just because you wait to report doesn't mean your assault was any less awful. So don't let someone try to tell you that just because you didn't come forward and tell your story, your assault must not be that bad. What people need to understand is that nothing about assault is easy. Personally, despite being over a year out of my assault, I still find certain things difficult. I still scan crowds for him, I still look at his Instagram, and I realize that dating again is not easy. In fact, it's terrifying, but there's no rush to get back out there. You'll know when you're ready. My mother, who has proven herself to be one of my biggest supporters through all of this, had an idea. On April 14th, exactly 1 year from my assault, she would not let me lay in bed and cry all day. Instead, she made me get up and go into town. Her reasoning was that I should not look at the day as the anniversary of my assault. Rather, I should look at the day as the anniversary of my survival. My mother is one of the strongest women I know, and it means the world to me that she's in this crowd, along with my grandmother, my sister, who is my best friend, my stepfather, and my boyfriend, who hasn't given up on me. Without them, and countless other people, I wouldn't be here. So finally, over a year after my assault, here I am, speaking to all of you, creating noise about an issue that affects us all. We need noise, we need support, and we need action. A very important person throughout my healing wrote me a note that said the following: Emily, lions care not about the opinion of sheep. My dear, you are a lion, and never forget that. That impacted me in more ways than I could ever explain, and you can find that note in my wallet. With all this being said, I leave you with the following: you are all strong, and you are all beautiful, and you all are lions.
I just want to take a moment to honor the vulnerability and courage it takes to stand up here. And I really appreciate being here tonight. So, this is a story submitted by Ellie, who is a 19-year-old college student. One look, sea green eyes framed by beautiful eyelashes. It only takes one. Raw electricity. It flowed through his fingertips, pulsed and vibrated over my skin. An addictive energy. He drew me in with his voice, whispering beautiful secrets in my ear, replaying in my head, echoing on like a broken record. I fall, body suspended in the depths, lungs collapsing, begging for oxygen only he could provide. I sink. For months, tides followed only him. His voice, his smile, his gravitational pull, ebbing and flowing, a rhythm I marched to, me becoming we. This is love, right? Having him and only him, my friends slowly fading, his thoughts, his needs, his feelings, drowning out the warnings of my family, closer to him and closer to insanity. Months pass, my shoulders beginning to weary, his happiness, his sadness, growing too heavy to carry. And soon, I wasn't enough. I can't tell if I'm sinking or if it's simply too deep to touch. In the high of his love, I am drowning. I become weak, my lips sewn shut by his words, my body frail. I look in the mirror and see a shadow of a girl looking back. In the midst of the hurricane, his thundering voice shatters my eardrums, his anger making me cower. I hear a whisper. This voice speaks only two words, two unspeakable words. What if? What if I let this burden fall away? What if I use the last sliver of my soul to swim to the surface as fast as I can, before it's too late? This whisper becomes a scream, an order from a higher power that I eventually give up trying to shut out. I listen, run, swim, survive. With everything I had, I looked in those sea green eyes, which once hypnotized me into submission, and say goodbye. In the eternal weeks, months following, I ache for him. The high of his love, his laugh, even the silence in moments when he is too angry to utter a word to me. There's a hole in my chest, a space he had occupied for years. An oozing gash, an endlessly dripping faucet, a hole I thought would never heal. There is one sentence, 11 words. Words that keep me breathing each and every moment. Words that give me hope. Now, I look back. The memories seem like a distant dream, a nightmare that I can't seem to remember, leaving me only with fear, regret, sadness, and strength. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Before I share my story with you all, I would just like to say a few thank yous. First, I want to thank everyone on this stage who are here speaking their truth, all of these warriors behind me. I applaud your strength and your courage. I know firsthand this isn't easy, but through sharing our stories, we can start to shed light on an issue that has for too long hidden in the shadows. To everyone in this audience and those tuning in live elsewhere, your presence and support are deeply appreciated. Some of you are dear friends, and I am sincerely grateful to have such incredible allies. To my parents, who aren't here tonight, but are watching back home in Nebraska, thank you for everything. You were there to pick up the pieces when I completely fell apart. You managed to get me packed up and moved out in less than 24 hours. No questions asked and without hesitation. Then you welcomed me with open arms back into my old basement bedroom. Not to mention, you gave me more love and support than I could have ever dreamed during one of the darkest times in my life. I love you both so much. And finally, I never would have had the courage to speak to you all without the incredible support from my fiance and biggest cheerleader. Eric, I just wanted to say a special thank you to you for not only being here tonight, but for truly giving me back the hope I had lost, and for showing me that it is possible to feel safe and loved in a way that I didn't think existed anymore. You were always so patient with me. You let me open up and share my story with you on my terms, and now I'm able to share that with all of you, almost 6 years later. You gave me my happy back. For that, I am truly and eternally grateful. I love you endlessly. My name is Amber, and this is my story. It was a Tuesday. I remember because I was coming home from an especially awful night at the restaurant. I was exhausted. I didn't have the energy to fight, and when he started in like usual, I just sat calmly and took it all in. Maybe it was my lack of response that got him so worked up. Maybe he was just bored of our usual back and forth. Maybe I did or said something wrong. But I remember, it was a Tuesday. The first time he hit me. Baby, oh God, baby, I'm so sorry. Fuck, I don't know what I was thinking. I promise it won't ever happen again. It did. The second time was after a night out with friends. We had been drinking. This time I argued back. I yelled, he cursed, you stupid bitch. Maybe it was my response that got him so worked up. Maybe my top was too tight, and maybe I was flirting with that guy at the bar. Maybe he was just drunk. But I remember, it was after a night out with friends. The second time he hit me. Jesus, babe, what have I done? Please forgive me, my love. I promise it won't ever happen again. It did. I'll be honest, after the third, fourth, maybe even the fifth time, I started to forget when, I forgot where, I forgot why. Did it even matter? I thought, this doesn't happen to girls like me. Strong girls, independent girls, smart girls. This doesn't happen to girls like me. Girls like me leave. Girls like me fight back. Girls like me don't stick around to be someone's punching bag. But I did. It wasn't just physical, of course. It never is. It was emotional, it was mental, hell, it was even sexual. But there I was, this strong, independent, smart girl, holding on to broken promises and covering up bruises with CoverGirl and oversized sunglasses, like the girls in the Lifetime movies. Lying to my friends, lying to my family, myself. This wasn't real life. Every time was the last time, until it wasn't. I came home early from work one night and I saw it. I saw him hit her. Defenseless, scared, hardly 10 pounds, I watched my dog cower in fear as he raised his hand to strike her again. In that moment, I was flooded with anger, anguish, and grief. I wondered, if this person can hit me, can hit my dog, would it really be a far cry for him to hit our children someday? Would I be able to explain to them why Daddy hits Mommy, why she's always crying? How old would they be when they did or said the wrong thing? Would I be able to protect them when I couldn't even protect myself? The answers to those questions were more than I could ignore. I couldn't let my story end here. No. I got out, I got help, I spoke up, and it wasn't easy. It was hell. But I was done living in fear. I was done accepting excuses, and I'd be damned if I was going to let it define me. I wasn't insane. My feelings were valid. That was his job, to make me feel like the crazy one, to isolate me, to make me insecure, to take away my identity, my confidence. The crazier he could make me look and feel, the more normal he looked. The more he convinced me that no one would believe me if I did speak up, the quieter I became. The more charming and charismatic he was, the less credible I seemed. The heavier the guilt and the shame, the more I started to think that I might actually deserve this. But I didn't. The mask was finally off, and I could see the monster underneath. He was cold and calculating, a master manipulator, the director of my living nightmare. It was a Tuesday. The day I walked out, the day I left that toxic person in the dust, the day I said enough was enough, the day I realized I deserved more, my life was worth more, I was worth so much more. I remember it was a Tuesday. There's great power and healing in sharing your story. I've experienced that firsthand. So take back the power, because you are not weak or fragile. Don't let them silence you, because what you have to say matters. Remember that you are a force to be reckoned with, no matter how small they made you feel. Don't let false narratives or the fear of judgment keep you from speaking your truth. Remember that it's okay not to be okay. So don't bottle it all up and suffer alone. And no matter how hard it may seem or how isolated you may feel, let people in. Learn to trust again. Don't let them take that from you. Allow yourself to be loved, to be cherished, because I promise you, it's out there, and you deserve it. Thank you.
Tomorrow, October 18th, I will be turning 21 years old. My story of survival plays a huge role in who I am today. There are things that I know for sure about myself and things that I know I like and I don't like. There are parts of me that are more sensitive than others, and there are parts of me that are a lot stronger than they used to be. There are also parts of me that are just hard to explain. Parts to me that not a lot of people take the time to understand. My name is Maggie, and this is my story. There are things about me that a lot of people could relate to, but they're not your typical topics in a casual conversation. Things that are hard to explain, but they are what make me, me. Tomorrow I will be turning 21, but if you really want to know me, you should know that 21-year-old me is a result of the ways that I have built strength off of 16-year-old me. To my fellow survivors, we did it. We're here. In this world full of aggression and taking things that are not ours to take, we're standing. I have been sharing my story to individuals, classrooms, large crowds, policemen, friends, coworkers, and family for over 3 years now. I talk about what it was like being in an abusive relationship and what that felt like. And there are a lot of situations that I can explain in a black and white manner. However, the majority of experiences that victims go through are not things that are simple. I have reached a point in my life where I can say to pretty much anyone, I was in an abusive relationship. But what if the parts that really make me who I am are hard to explain? To my fellow survivors, I've been standing and I've been sharing, but I have not been talking about the things that are hard to explain. Because we can all say, me too, but I know that behind every me too is a you wouldn't understand. So what if the reason why a man calling himself a Christian means absolutely nothing to me is because when I was 15, I met a boy at youth group that altered my life forever? What if the reason I prefer to go shopping alone is because when I was 16, I was sitting in the changing room staring at my phone waiting to see if that same boy approved of my clothes? What if the reason I check the back seat of my car before I get in is because when I was 17, that same boy hid in the bushes of my house stalking me because he couldn't let go of his control? What if the reason I love to work out and lift weights is because I was physically abused for so long that I worked to feel strong and tough and honestly like I could fight back? What if the reason why my stomach flips over every time someone touches my neck is because my entire body fills with fear as I am brought back to the vision of his hands around my neck? What if the reason why I love hugs and being held is because it's really hard to stand up every day and be your own protector? What if the reason I still get nervous to share is because the first time I did share, I was told that I was being a gossiper by my own church? What if the reason I am most insecure of my own intelligence is because I was told for so long by my biggest supporter that I was mentally disabled and stupid? Because it's really hard to explain to someone that I feel passionately about health due to the fact that when I was 16, I was asked what I weighed every day. Or that every time I see a white Volkswagen Bug, I remember sitting in one, sobbing and shaking and just being told to shut up. And truly, it is even harder to explain that the reason why sex is a big deal to me is because I have wanted to rip my own skin off in disgust and shame for the nights that an unworthy boy saw me naked, physically and emotionally. Now do you see that sharing that I was raped and I was physically abused and I have wanted to die, that's just the surface. But understanding why a random man walking too close behind me in the grocery store still makes my stomach turn, that's hard to explain. To my fellow survivors, I hear the hard to explain parts of your story, but I also see your strength. If you understand those hard-to-explain parts of a survivor's story, you will be able to see just a small glimpse of how much strength it took to stand back up. So yes, I have been sharing my story for over 3 years now. But today, as I tell a bunch of strangers the real stories behind who I am, I have fear, but I do it for those who felt how I did when I was 16. I do it for those who need to know that they are so much stronger than they think they are. I do it for the people who understand what it feels like to stand under a man that fills you with fear. I do it for the girl who thinks that she's ugly because a boy's masculinity is threatened by her work of art body. I do it for my fellow survivors. To those of you who want to help our survivors, the hard-to-explain parts might be uncomfortable for you to listen to, but I can promise you that they were even more uncomfortable to go through and extremely painful to fight alone. To those of you who want to help, listen with open ears, protect with faithful hands, and walk with us as we share so that we can stop at least one more person from living in fear. Thank you.
We want to give you some time to process what you just heard and to write down any questions you have on the index cards you have on your seat. So in a few minutes, our friends from Maine Boys to Men will come around and collect your cards. Just pass them to the aisle seat.
I want to thank you, first of all, for being so willing to ask questions. I think it's really important that this is a dialogue and that we all learn, and I'm really pleased with how many people felt that they could ask questions, so thank you. Okay, so, ready? Am I in your way? Can everybody see? Oh, I should introduce the new people on the stage, first of all. Do you want to, you can maybe say who you are. This is my friend Dan, who is from Through These Doors. Dan, why don't you tell people what you do?
Hey everyone, my name's Dan. I use him pronouns. I am from Through These Doors, the Domestic Violence Resource Center for Cumberland County. I'm on the education side of things, and that program is called the Young Adult Abuse Prevention Program. It's a mouthful, so we shorten it to YAP. And YAP goes into middle schools, high schools, colleges, and has open, honest conversations with young people about dating and love and relationships.
What an elevator pitch.
I know, I say it every day.
Awesome. Great.
All right, here as I go, stumbling over my words, not going to be on that level. Hi, my name is Danny. I work with Maine Boys to Men. I'm a program specialist and facilitator, mainly working in what we call RSVP, which stands for Reducing Sexism and Violence Program. Working in middle school with middle school age boys, and then in high school with people of all gender, as well as adult facilitations, film screenings, and other things of that nature, trying to build awareness around these topics. Thanks for having me here.
Thank you, Danny.
Hi, my name is Brittany. I do Title IX prevention work at University or UNE itself. So I am the investigator and prevention specialist for UNE. Just for anyone that doesn't know, quick background. Title IX is an educational amendment that was put in place to ensure gender equity in educational settings that are federally funded. So a lot of what my job ends up being in terms of investigations and prevention work focuses around power-based personal violence and sexual assault. So if claims come in of any kind of that kind of violence happening, I investigate those, but then a lot of my prevention work centers around that as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Brittany. You can, we'll pass it. We'll just do the pass. Okay. So the first question we have says, what should you tell someone who questions why it took them so long to come out with their abuse? For example, but why didn't they just report it right away?
I wanted to, it's still on?
Yeah.
I wanted to touch on this one because this is a question that I was asked a lot after I got out of my relationship. And I would just like to kind of give the perspective that a lot of people who are in these abusive relationships run the risk of having their abuser stalk them after they leave. And when you're in that type of relationship, you know the fear, and the fear is what drives you to not leave, because the percentages of people that are stalked after abusive relationships are so high, and that's something that I personally experienced, and I can say that I knew that that was something that was going to come up because of the amount of control that was in the relationship.
Thank you, Maggie.
You're welcome.
Yes. And Emily has some great questions that were specifically for her, and she is going to read one of the questions now and answer it.
Okay, so the first one is, what LD was passed recently? And that is LD 1171, an act to prevent sexual and domestic violence and to support survivors. It was more of like a financial bill to raise money and to be able to give money to people like rape response services, Partners for Peace, corporations like that. And my mother and my stepfather, who are sitting front and center, were able to take me to the State House, and we had a representative who was helping us through all of this, and my mother was able to testify on my behalf because I wasn't ready, and share my story and give them some ideas that she thought would help better the bill. So props to her.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mom. She really is my warrior.
Okay, we can hang on to it and I'll ask the next question. So here's a great one that anyone can answer. After all you've been through, are you now able to love yourself? And it also says, you're all wonderful.
The short answer would be yes. The longer answer would be it definitely takes time. And I think it's personal to each person. There's a lot of similarities and commonalities that you probably heard throughout all of our stories, but they're also so unique to each person. And so whether you get to that place months later, years later, it takes time. But eventually, you'll get to a place where I think maybe we could all probably say we're at, that you do learn to love yourself again. So, and let other people love you as well, which is important.
Right. Thank you, Amber. Does anybody else want to jump in on that? No. Okay. Here's one for anybody who wants to answer this. Do you fear for your safety even years later and fear your abuser?
I think this question is one of those things that's hard to explain. I also think that it's not just like a yes or no answer. I personally have come to a place where it doesn't ruin my day anymore. But that takes time. I don't know if I'll ever get to a place where being in the same room as him would not make me scared. But I think that that's okay. Right after the relationship, there was fear all the time, every day, but that's part of getting over it. That's part of rising up and being stronger and gaining strength, is learning how to have your life no longer be affected by that person. Mm-hmm. And that takes time.
Yeah. Thank you, Maggie.
I would just say too, with that note that Maggie mentioned, immediately after having all of that fear, that's why it's so important to have people in your corner, in your life, that have your back, because it is a really vulnerable time where literally your own shadow scares you. So having that kind of a support system when you do come out of it is huge.
Yeah. Thank you. Here's a question I think is for you, Danny. What programs do Maine Boys to Men offer to help address this situation? What are you all doing to make a change in this?
Yeah. So I would say that we start with a middle school program where we work with often 8th grade male-identified boys, and we do a 4-hour program that we do 1 hour at a time over the course of 4 weeks. That I mentioned earlier is called RSVP, and it covers topics about gender stereotypes, as well as conversations around empathy and healthy relationships, and sort of builds to this point of like the active bystander approach. And so how somebody could get involved if they were to see something that maybe doesn't sit well with them after what we hope is some heightened awareness around these issues. And then we build on that in the high schools, and we try and work with a lot of the same high schools that we work with middle school students with, to dive a little bit deeper and to have a little bit richer conversations about these issues and what people can do to help. I think we're at this point where it's not necessarily about awareness anymore, and it's more about like creating institutional change, right? So how can we push youth to get to the point where they're in a place of power, where they feel like they have a voice and they can create change?
Yes, right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Brittany, here is a great one for you. Is there one typical kind of relationship abuse?
No. There's no one typical kind of relationship abuse. There's no one typical victim. There's no one typical individual that, in the capacity in which I work, that comes into my office and has seen some kind of situation that has impacted them. It can be emotional, it can be physical. As your story shared, it can really run the gamut. So there's no one typical kind of abuse. One of the programs that we administer at UNE is called Green Dot, and it's a bystander prevention program that helps raise awareness, and it gives bystanders opportunities to intervene if they see something that may escalate to power-based personal violence. And something that's interesting is we do trainings for staff and faculty, and oftentimes when we're doing those trainings, there'll be like this aha moment where someone realizes, I'm in that relationship, or I have no idea that that could even count as abuse.
Right.
So there really is no one typical kind of abuse or victim, and it runs such a gamut, and it impacts, I think, all of us in ways that we don't even realize.
Right.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Who, in your opinion, is in the best position to help a victim of domestic violence? Dan, you could answer that one. That's a good one for you. Yeah.
I'm not sure about best, but there's some crazy research out there about how the first person who's experienced violence, the first person that they tell, the way that that person responds has a huge impact over whether they tell anyone else or not.
Right.
So I think since all of us here are people that could be someone that someone does share this with at some point, I'm just going to put it back on everyone in this room. Like, you are the best person. Anyone that is sharing this with you, that's you. And you don't have to say anything. If you can be present with that person, really listen, accept their whole self, everything that they're sharing in that moment, and reflect their wholeness back. Like y'all were talking about, getting back to that place of loving yourself. If you can be someone that loves someone when they're messy, when they're jagged, when they're reactive, when they're going through a tough time, you don't gotta say anything. You can just accept them for who they are and what they're going through in that moment. And if you do want to say something, I don't know, a phrase that I use all the time is, I don't even know what to say, I'm glad you told me. And that's not my line, I take that from Brene Brown. It's about responding with empathy, warm accompaniment, and that's something that we can all do.
Thank you. Do you guys, does anybody else, any of the speakers want to respond to that? Like, what was the most helpful thing? You would agree? Okay. How do we as a community contribute to prevention efforts? So more than just schools, I think this is more about, all of us.
So something that we try to educate and talk about with Made Boys to Men is this idea of the continuum of harm. That we know that somebody doesn't...
Just hold your microphone right here.
Yeah. We know that somebody doesn't essentially just crawl out of the swamp and commit some terrible act of sexual assault or sexual harassment and then leave town by dusk. We know that it builds to this moment, and it builds to this moment through sexist jokes that went unchecked. It builds to this moment through attitudes that are voiced that people never respond to or never call out, as that's not cool. So I think it's the responsibility of every individual in this room to say something when something doesn't sit well with you. If you have that feeling in your stomach, like, that didn't feel right, if you can step up in that moment and create an impact, and it might not be visible right in that case, but just saying something, or even just being present, shooting that person a couple stern eyes, that might do a lot, and that might check that person. There's a phrase that Heidi uses that I really like, where when people are using language like that, it's sort of like they're trying on that language in the same way that you would be trying on a new outfit if you went shopping, right? And if they're gonna get this really negative feedback, the second that they say a joke that might be offensive, or that they say a slur or an offensive word, if they get this negative feedback in that moment, they might not use it next time. So stopping that violence before it ever escalates to the point of violence, I think, is really important.
That's a great answer. Thank you.
Yeah, would anybody like to add to that?
Emily, do you want to read another one of your questions? Yeah.
Does our legal system effectively serve victims? If no, can it be reformed? I have a lot of feelings about this one. I believe that our legal system is able to provide a certain amount of justice, a very certain amount. For me personally, the odds were very stacked against me. My lawyer, like literally 2 days before, got Lyme's disease, and I was given a lawyer the morning of who hadn't read my case, and I was also told that I would not have to testify. And when I walked into that courtroom, the first thing they did was throw me on the stand. And I was unprepared, I wasn't ready, my lawyer wasn't ready. And I was also given a criminal judge for a protection order. And I don't think he quite understood that we were just going for a piece of paper. But on top of all of that, his lawyer was brutal and was very awful to me. For instance, I, as you all know, looked to my mother for a lot of support. And when I would look at my mother throughout the court hearing, he would yell at me and think that I was getting support from my mother and that she was giving me answers, when really she was telling me to breathe and that I was okay. So I believe that our legal system can provide a very certain amount of justice to our victims, but I think they can also provide a very certain amount of injustice. And there's a very fine line between that I think can be reformed with better laws like mandated reporting in our school systems.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. I think we can all agree with that. Yeah. Yeah. Brittany wants to add to that. Yeah.
I think something that is really important to remember too, as our processes continue to change and hopefully as our system continues to grow, that there is never going to be a day in which going through some kind of legal process like that is not difficult for a survivor. So having those people that surround them, that support them, like you said your family did, it's so crucial, because it's never going to be just about standing in front of a judge and getting a piece of paper. It's so much more than that. And the process is just the way the legal system is set up. It's there to help, but also the process is never going to be easy. So making sure you're providing the supports for people in your life that are going through that process. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, absolutely. Yep, jump in. Pass it on. Oh, yeah, all right, fine. Yes, of course.
I also just wanted to add that from my personal experience, I vividly remember sitting in the police office. I remember exactly what room, I remember where I was sitting, I remember who was there, and I remember what it felt like to have to write down every single thing that happened. And that is so much more re-traumatizing than anybody could imagine. And I remember doing that, and I remember the policemen that were there, and I remember their faces, and it's just like what Dan was saying earlier. The first couple reactions that a victim gets are the most important. And I think that not speaking much into the justice system, but also just as speaking to policemen in general, the reactions that I got they were good, but they were also, I didn't get any resources. I didn't get any follow-up. I didn't get any sort of checking in or anything like that, or they didn't send me to any sort of Maine Boys to Men or through these doors or any help resources like that. And so I would just say that we need to be a lot more aware of as a community of where we can send people to help.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Here's a great question, general question that I think everybody might have an opinion. Oh, Dan.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
Dan. Oh, well, he's my friend too. Shoot.
You got a lot going on right now.
I need my glasses. Go ahead.
And I'm really glad that you said that, because I think it depends on the individual officer, it depends on the individual force, it depends on, and there's the larger system that we first started this conversation with. And just to provide a little ray of hope, through these doors, as well as other domestic violence resource centers, have advocates within the court system, within the police systems, who, if they are linked to folks who are experiencing this, advocate for them within those systems. They're talking to those police officers, they're talking to the entire department to help improve those responses.
Yes.
Yeah, a little ray of hope there.
Yes, thank you. Okay, how do I become more knowledgeable about these topics? So for where do people start? This is new to them, they really feel impacted, and they want to learn more. Where do they start?
This.
Yeah.
Yes, that's all I have to say.
Okay, moving along. Yeah.
One of the things that I do as an educator is like when we get a question, I tend to put it back to the person that asked it. So now I'm not going to put it back to you, but like I would invite you all to have a brief conversation with the folks that you're sitting next to. And are there any sources through which you've learned about this issue that we could learn from you? Does anyone in the audience have anything that they want to shout out? Yeah.
Oh, I do.
Yeah, go on.
Let me tell you, when you have a
Go ahead.
minor who's involved in the court system, as a minor who gets involved in the court system, it's really important to know, I did not know this, the minute you fill that paperwork out with a police officer, you are supposed to get a victim's advocate. You are supposed to get a social worker that follows you through the whole process, prepares you. We were given absolutely no resources. I learned resources through the good old-fashioned Google.
Yeah.
I learned almost a year later, after we had been through court, we had been through a lot of major crimes unit stuff, forensic stuff, that we were supposed to be given a victim's advocate the day we filed the initial paperwork. And I think the court system and the police at times are so like, oh my God, that they get almost a little flustered themselves. I think it's an uncomfortable situation, uncomfortable subject for, you know, the police officers involved, the forensics unit involved, whoever's involved, and they often forget themselves in their own anxiety the resources that are available and that should be offered to you. Even with the forensics, working with the major crimes unit and the forensics unit, we were finding out resources that even the forensics and major crimes sexual assault unit did not know existed in the state. So really, to me, getting, first of all, funding to get some kind of a resource set up at a state level that's online. We called 211 to FART. Maybe we should be able to call 211 to get a list of resources.
Yeah.
Just saying.
Yeah.
Shouldn't call, you know.
Yeah.
I
Thank
truly.
you. Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. So, what role can men play in being allies to women? Oh, Amber. Yep.
Okay, so I have a couple different ways of thinking about this. When I was first going through the situation, I was a chef. I worked in restaurants. The person who I was with was also a chef. And I worked in a very male-dominated career field. All of my fellow chefs and friends and coworkers were majority men. And they knew both of us in this situation. I will say, you know, I was pleasantly surprised by a lot of them when, you know, some of this started to come out. Just not jumping to accuse somebody of, well, what did you do to make this person react that way? Or what was your part in it? Or just listening and being supportive of that person. It really, especially when you've just gotten out of a relationship like that, and it was with, I mean, in my case, it was with a man. If the rest of the men in your life then come at you in a way that's not super supportive, it's extra triggering. It can be really difficult. So I will say I got a lot of support from family, friends that were female, but when I got support from my male friends at that time, initially right afterwards, it really had a huge impact because it showed you and made you feel that, like, okay, there are men that I can feel safe around.
Right.
And then I guess I'll just extra applause to Eric, because when I'll just say, for anyone that gets in a relationship with someone who has had a previous abusive relationship, it can be hard to traverse. It can be messy. Just the nature of things is messy, and being patient with them, letting them share with you what they're comfortable with on their terms, and accepting that, and just being there to listen means the world to someone. So,
Thank you, Amber.
I think on the preventative side, I think it's really important that men are coming forward and are pairing with women and people of all genders to tackle these issues. But I would argue just as important, if not more important, is men going into male-dominated spaces and having a voice on these things. Because young men are at a point right now where they're receiving so many different messages about what it means to be a man, about what it means to be masculine, that if we have men in our society that are going into male-dominated spaces and actually making an impact, talking about some of these things, it's going to create an entire wave of change.
Thank you.
I also just wanted to say that a huge part of my story was that the person that I was in a relationship with told me again and again and again and again, I am your biggest protector. Like, I'm never gonna let anything happen to you. I would never hurt you. Like, I will always take care of you. I will always protect you, even though he was the one doing the harm. So for me, I was kind of jaded in a sense afterwards, and I didn't really think that a guy saying, you know, I'm not gonna let anything happen to you really meant anything. And so now, someone saying that to me as a friend or in a relationship has so much weight for me that that's why I say, like, protect with faithful hands. Don't say that you're gonna do that unless you're gonna do it.
Yeah. Thank you, Maggie. Emily, would you like to read another one of your questions?
Sorry you have to hear from me so much.
We love it.
What did healthcare provide, say, or do that helped, didn't help, or did more harm? So in the last year, I have spent roughly 4 months in intensive outpatient therapy, which is very intense. It's literally in the name. So I was originally put into a summer program because I was self-harming and had suicidal tendencies. And I was thrown into a group that had been together all summer, and I was a newcomer, and I was dead set on getting out of there and being there for my first day of school. And being put in that situation, before going in, I felt so incredibly alone. And I had tremendous support from my family, but I didn't know anybody who knew what it felt like. And going into that situation, I realized, wow, this actually happens to a lot of minors. We share, we learn to share. It's not easy at first. We get used to each other, really used to each other. And we play a lot of games. And it was incredible to meet so many people that knew what I was going through, but also had so many ideas for coping, because coping methods are definitely key. For mine is music. I sing a lot. I really like to sing. But at the same time, part of it didn't help. It was the fact that while I was working on my own healing, I was surrounded by 15 or 20 other kids who were also dealing with their own healing. And it was really hard for me to share my story and then realize the girl next to me had almost the same exact story. And I just wanted to hug her and let her know that I'm here for you. And it was really hard to be able to prioritize my healing when I wanted to help everybody else around me. So I was able to go back to school for a little bit, but realized I wasn't ready, and ended up back in Acadia for 2 more months. And the same thing, where I met a therapist named Alistair who changed my life. Sadly, I can't find him because I wanted him to be here. He was the one who wrote me the note that lions care not about the opinions of sheep. And he was there my first couple months, but he completely
changed my life, and he was a big role in saving my life, and I wouldn't be here without him. So the healthcare system provides an awful, awful lot, and Alistair was just one of the most incredible people that this healthcare system provided me.
Thank you. Yeah.
I think something that your story says well, and something that we all have to keep in mind, is that healing isn't linear, and the healthcare space, we automatically think that someone will need healthcare assistance immediately after something occurs, but that's not necessarily the case. I see students who come in who had something happen 15 years ago, and they still need supports and services. So remembering that while yes, healing is happening all the time, like those healthcare supports change over time, but are still necessary, not just immediately after.
Thank you. Okay. This question comes from a Catholic who wants to give mercy and forgiveness to her perpetrator so healing can be possible for survivor and perpetrator, especially helping prevent more victims of said perpetrator. How do you suggest survivor and perpetrator heal through given mercy? And yeah, that's probably enough information. Yeah.
I think that mercy and forgiveness means a couple different things and something different to each person. I think that in terms of forgiving the person that abused you, it doesn't mean that you have to be friends with them. It doesn't mean that you have to like them. It doesn't mean that you have to be around them. All it means is that you're taking all of that anger towards them and you're letting it go. And for me, what that means, speaking as a Christian, considering this is a Catholic question, I give to God. And I don't think that holding that weight is going to do me any good. It doesn't mean that I would say amazing things about this person, but equally as so, saying the bad things and holding on to that negativity does not do you any good. And so for me, that's what mercy and forgiveness means. And I know my mom and I have actually talked about this a lot because we've had to be in the same room as him together, and it creates a lot of anger. But that anger doesn't do you any good because the anger is what started the violence in the first place. So for me, letting it go was just another step in recognizing that he has zero say in how I live my life now.
Thank you, Maggie. Yes. Is the line between an abusive relationship and a simply bad relationship a feeling, or is there some objective criteria in the eyes of the law or in the eyes of social work, in the eyes of society? Where is that line? Are you gesturing? Sure. Okay. All right. Is the line between an abusive relationship and a simply bad relationship a feeling? Or is there some objective criteria? How can you tell if you're in just a really kind of crappy relationship or one that's abusive? What's the difference?
I mean, the first thing I would say is get out of either one. But I also think, you know, you kind of heard the gamut again through our stories tonight, and the physical abuse and sexual abuse and the all of those things stand out as like, that's an abusive relationship. But it's so much more than that. And it's all of these little minute things, and like the things that Maggie mentioned, the control, and the things that you, honestly, when you're in it, when you're in the thick of it, you don't even see. And that other people, outsiders looking in, would look and be like, that's crazy. And you see it as totally normal, and you start to become desensitized to it. And then when you're outside of it and you're looking in, you're like, wow, how did I ever put up with that? It's these little things of making you not feel worthy or making you feel like you're only worth something if you're with this person, or that they isolate you from your friends, from your family. It happens differently in every situation, but a lot of times it tends to happen slowly and small things at first that you don't maybe notice. And then all of a sudden you may think, oh, just one day I woke up and it was awful and he hit me. And then you think back months prior and you start to see the things that were leading up to that. And so I think if you're even anywhere remotely close to starting to question or wonder if there is a line or where that line is, get out before it's obvious. Because, I mean,
Thank you.
One of the things that we do in the Maine Boys to Men trainings is talk about how to see this line, and we talk about the signs, and we talk about, you know, the good and the bad and what makes people comfortable. And so one thing that comes to mind for me is we've all probably heard the term the positive sandwich, like when you're trying to give a critique to someone and you want to say something nice before you say the bad thing. A lot of the times in these relationships, it's a negative sandwich. They're going to say something bad, but then they're going to say, I love you, but you shouldn't eat that piece of pizza, but you're beautiful. And it's that mind game, and the physical abuse does not come before the emotional abuse the majority of the time, if not, I would say all the time. And so those negative sandwiches and those push and pulls of I'm going to protect you and then I'm going to hurt you, that's not healthy. And that's where the snowball comes in of this tiny little insult of, you know, you shouldn't eat that pizza, or you know, are looking a little larger than normal. Like, that's not, those negative comments are what spiral down the road into the physical and sexual abuse.
Thank you. Anybody else want to chime in there? Yeah?
I would say that if that's something you're struggling with for yourself or a partner or a friend, whoever, not necessarily a partner, but yourself or a friend or someone close to you or a family member, there are resources out there. There are 24-hour hotlines that are local to the area. Sexual assault response services, the Southern Maine through these stores have hotlines. If you're scared for yourself or someone else and you're not quite sure what that looks like, and if you're seeing something that might be abuse or might not be, those are great resources to reach out to as well. And those are free and confidential.
And we have the information from Through These Doors on the table in the back. And again, we do have advocates in the room who'd be happy to speak with you. Okay. What were the key seminal events leading to your rising above the abuse, to your recovery? Were there moments that that stick out in your mind as really important to you getting out?
The moment I realized that I wasn't okay and that I needed help was the day I broke down and told my parents. That was when I realized, like, I need help. Like, I can't do this on my own. And there was no really profound awakening that made me realize that I'm not okay. It was weeks of dwelling in what had happened and then realizing I need to tell my parents, because my parents are supposed to take care of me and they can't take care of me if they don't know. And so I was able to tell them, and it was hard, but it was, in the end, it was definitely worth it.
I think that's a really important point to make, because I think that if people are looking for, you know, the sign that they should get out of a relationship, what I've heard from you all is that there's no one sign, that it is this sort of like this very complicated stew that you're seeping in at that moment. Thank you for sharing that. Emily, since you have the mic, do you have one more question you want to read?
Yeah, I do.
Perfect.
This question is really powerful. To the third speaker, the youngest female,
Your story awoke the 15-year-old in me who was raped by a 24-year-old. I've had therapy all of my adult life, but I still could never tell my parents what happened. I'm wondering, how did your relationship with your parents change after you told them? I would just like to say, wow, like, thank you for writing this to me. It means it's an honor, I guess, to be able to answer this question. At first, I'm pretty sure my parents were just really scared and confused. My dad particularly, because for my dad it was, somebody did this to my daughter and I'm gonna find him. Mm-hmm. And my dad at first was so sad, and then he was angry, and now he's okay. And I've told everybody this just because I'm so proud of him. He was able to watch Law & Order a couple weeks ago without changing the channel, which is really big for him. Sadly, he wasn't ready to be here tonight, which is completely understandable. It's hard, particularly for him in my instance. And my mother found the coping method of hours and hours of research. Like an absurd amount of research, like binders full of research of things and experimental, trials and stuff to help with my healing. But at the end of the day, they were there to pick me up off the floor when I was having a bad dream, or saw him on the sidewalk at school, driving by. I obviously transferred schools. And then there's my sister. And man, I'm gonna cry again. My sister was what made me cry in my speech. She is my best friend and my other half and a human who I love more than anything in this world. And my sister herself has been through a little bit. And she never told my parents, and that day was sharing for both of us. And oh my God, I would not be here without her, because the hours and hours of conversation. I remember a couple days after I came out, she brought me to the beach with her giant dog, and we just sat on the rock and talked. And it's the support from my sister particularly that helped me get through this, and I know that I would not be here without her, and I just love her so much. Thank you, sis.
Emily.
Don't cry.
Do any of you have any final thoughts you'd like to share? We have one final bit for the end of. Oh, I'm sorry. I need to wear my glasses. Okay. We have one final bit. We're going to ask you to fill out the questionnaire again, and Emily's going to come and read those, and we'll have just some final remarks. Thank you.
Do I need to give this to someone? Is this the one?
Yeah, you were talking about singing.
Yeah, I was on Broadway for a couple days.
No, you were not.
She was in Hamilton.
You were in Hamilton?
Angelica Schuyler in a Broadway production, like a juniors. What?
That's super exciting.
Just for a couple days. It was fun.
That's fantastic.
No big deal.
You can tell I'm in social work school. I did. Is this? I'll just speak loudly. So we're going to read those 3 statements again, and we're going to ask you to respond to them. Domestic violence is an impulse control or anger management issue. Domestic violence is bad, but it happens elsewhere. It doesn't happen in my community. If it were really that bad, the victim would leave. I will let you know that there are bags that are labeled at the door. We'd love for you to drop those in the bag on your way out, as well as if you have any thoughts about where you would like to see our group go moving forward, we would love to hear what your thoughts are. I will tell you that domestic violence is not an impulse control issue, but an intentional harm directed at specific individuals. Impulse and anger control are not selective outbursts. Anyone from any socioeconomic, gender, cultural, or other background can be abused. It happens in every community, everywhere. And these amazing, strong storytellers shared why they didn't or even couldn't leave. It's just never that easy. And we have one final question for our speakers, and invite them to come to the front of the stage. You have the microphone, good, excellent. If there was one thing your community could have done for you when you were in the abusive relationship or when you were beginning your healing process, what would it have been?
I would have wanted to be believed by every person that I told, and I would have wanted to feel more protected by my community.
I would say if you suspect anyone that you know is in an abusive relationship, don't be afraid to offer your support to them privately. They may not be ready to admit anything. They may not be ready to share. They might even be defensive at first, and that's okay. But when they do decide to leave, it's so, so very important to feel like you have someone in your corner, someone who has your back, and that starts before you leave.
Mm-hmm.
So this is Ellie's response. I would have wanted someone to more actively tell me that the behavior they were seeing from me wasn't healthy, so that maybe I could have seen it too.
For me, I really could have used some support from my school system to feel safe in the hallways that I had to walk every day. And this is one, like, mostly for my classmates. I would have really appreciated if they didn't question me about it and not believe me simply because he was their friend, and he would never do that because he was their friend.
And this is what Anna would like. I would have liked if my community hadn't written me off as emotionally unstable and had instead cared enough to wonder why that was.
Well, we are here with you. And I would like right now to ask all of the advocates from Through These Doors and Maine Boys to Men, anyone working with Maine Boys to Men, to stand up, wherever you are in the crowd, to just stand up, please. And Title IX, of course. So we're all over the room. We are with you, you who tell your stories now, and you can stay standing. And all of you who have stories waiting to be told, bursting in your hearts to be told, maybe known only to you or to your loved ones. Whether you ever speak it or not, we all stand with you. You have an army behind you, and you are not alone. You matter, and you are loved. So if anyone in the audience wants to stand with these courageous, beautiful people, stand up now. And let's show our collective voice and our collective appreciation and our unwavering love. And let us each make one small change that all put together will change our community. We can do this. To survivors everywhere, we hear you, we believe you, and we are going to make this world a safer place. Thank you all very much for coming.